You lied to me!
You lied to me. Maya's voice cracked as she said it, standing in the doorway of a house that no longer felt like home. Rain hammered the windows behind her, and her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them against her chest just to keep still. Ryu Daehyun stood across the room, leaning on his cane, his jaw tight with a pain that had nothing to do with his legs. I didn't touch her, he said. Maya, look at me. I would never. There are papers, Daehyun. Her voice broke on his name. There's a woman carrying your child. What am I supposed to believe? My eyes? Or you? He took a step toward her. The cane slipped. He caught himself against the wall, wincing, and for a moment neither of them moved. Believe me, he whispered. Please. Just believe me. But Maya was already turning away, already reaching for Noah's small hand, already walking into a night that would swallow her whole for almost a year. Neither of them knew, in that moment, that everything they believed was a lie built by people who smiled at their dinner table. To understand how two people who loved each other so completely ended up on opposite sides of a storm, we have to go back. Back to before the papers. Back to before the accident. Back to the day a broken man met a woman who refused to see him as anything other than human. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Daehyun had once been a man other men feared to look in the eye. He ran one of the most powerful private business empires in the country, an empire built on decades of quiet control, favors owed, and doors that opened simply because his name was attached to them. People bowed when he entered a room. They laughed at jokes he hadn't made yet, just to please him. Nobody ever told him no. Then came the accident. A car on a wet road, a driver who never should have been trusted, and a crash that folded metal like paper. Daehyun survived. His spine did not fully forgive him for it. The doctors said nerve damage. They said chronic pain. They said he was lucky to walk at all, and that walking, from now on, would cost him more than most people spend on an entire day's effort. His body healed, as much as it was going to heal. His pride did not. His relatives, the ones who used to compete for a smile from him, began having quiet conversations behind closed doors. Conversations about succession. Conversations about whether a man who needed a cane to cross a room could still be trusted to lead anything at all. Nobody said it to his face. They didn't have to. He could feel it in the way conversations stopped when he entered, in the way his own uncle, Ryu Seok-won, started referring to the future of the family in a tone that no longer included him. He hired physical therapists. He fired them. He hired more. He fired those too. Nobody could handle his temper, his impatience, his refusal to be handled like something fragile. Then, on a Tuesday that meant nothing to anyone, a new therapist walked into his private rehabilitation room, and everything started to shift in ways nobody could have predicted. Her name was Maya, 34 years old, a widow, a mother, a woman who had buried a husband 3 years earlier and had been running on determination and coffee ever since. Her husband had been a good man, steady and quiet, the kind of person who fixed things around the house without being asked and hummed off key in the shower every morning. When the illness took him, it did so slowly, stealing pieces of him over 11 long months until there was nothing left to hold on to. Maya had sat beside his hospital bed the same way she would later sit beside someone else's, learning far too early in life what it meant to watch someone you love slip further away with every passing day. After the funeral, she promised herself 2 things. She would never let grief make her bitter, and she would never let Noah go without, no matter what it cost her personally. 3 jobs became her answer to that promise. She worked 3 jobs. Mornings at a physical therapy clinic, afternoons doing home health visits, nights cleaning offices after everyone else had gone home because her son Noah needed shoes that fit and a roof that didn't leak. She was tired in a way that lived in her bones, but she never let it show in front of the people who needed her strength more than she needed rest. When her supervisor told her about a new client, wealthy, difficult, allegedly impossible, she almost said no. She had heard the rumors. Everyone in the clinic had heard the rumors about the man who fired therapists like he was changing socks. She said yes anyway. Bills didn't care about reputations. The first time she walked into his rehabilitation room, Dae-hyun didn't even look up. "Another one," he muttered. "How much are they paying you to waste your time?" "Enough," Maya said simply, setting down her bag. "Let's see your range of motion." He looked up then, surprised. Most people flinched at his tone. She hadn't even blinked. "I could have you replaced by tomorrow," he said, testing her. "You could," she agreed. "But then you'd still be in this chair, and I'd still have a job by Thursday. So let's not waste either of our time." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not quite respect. Not yet. But something close to curiosity, which for a man like him was rare enough to notice. Weeks passed. The sessions were brutal. His body fought every stretch, every exercise, every small increment of progress. There were days he screamed at her to leave. There were days he threw a water bottle across the room in frustration when his leg refused to hold his weight. Maya never left. She never raised her voice either. "Healing isn't about how fast you walk," she told him one evening when he sat on the floor where he'd fallen, refusing to let her help him up. "It's about refusing to stop." He stared at her for a long moment, breathing hard, sweat on his brow. Nobody had spoken to him like that in years. Nobody had dared to be that honest with a man who could ruin their life with a single phone call. "Why do you care?" he asked, quieter than he meant to. "Because you're a person," she said. "Not a title. Not a name people whisper about. Just a person trying to stand up again. I've helped a lot of people stand up again." He let her help him that time. It became a rhythm neither of them planned. 3 sessions a week became 4. 4 became almost daily. Somewhere in the exhaustion and the sweat and the small, hard-won victories, a few more degrees of flexibility, a few more steps without the cane, a laugh that surprised even himself. Something began to grow that neither of them had names for yet. Then Noah entered the picture, and everything shifted again. Maya hadn't planned to bring her son to Dae-hyun's estate, but a cancelled babysitter left her no choice one afternoon. She apologized 3 times before Dae-hyun even answered the door, expecting anger, expecting to be fired on the spot. Instead, Dae-hyun looked down at the 8-year-old boy clutching a worn stuffed dinosaur, and something in his stern expression cracked just slightly. "Is that a T-Rex?" Dae-hyun asked. Noah's eyes lit up. "He's a Spinosaurus. Way stronger than a T-Rex. He can swim." "Is that so?" Dae-hyun's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I didn't know dinosaurs could swim." "Everybody knows that," Noah said, in the tone only an 8-year-old can manage, equal parts patience and disbelief at adult ignorance. By the end of that session, Noah was sitting cross-legged on the floor, narrating an elaborate battle between his dinosaur and one of Dae-hyun's decorative bookends, and Dae-hyun was laughing. Actually laughing, a sound so unfamiliar in that house that one of the staff members poked her head in just to check nothing was wrong. Maya watched from the doorway, something warm and dangerous blooming in her chest. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself it was just relief, seeing her son happy, seeing her patient finally smiling. She wasn't being entirely honest with herself. Over the following weeks, Noah became a regular presence, and Dae-hyun found himself looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays for reasons that had very little to do with physical therapy. He learned Noah liked dinosaurs and hated peas. He learned Maya hummed old songs under her breath when she concentrated. He learned the particular way she bit her lip when she was trying not to laugh at something he said. He also learned, slowly, painfully, that he was falling for a woman who had no idea how much power and money surrounded her, and who, he suspected, wouldn't have cared even if she did. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he managed 4 full steps without his cane. For steps that cost him more effort than most people spend running a mile. Maya's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. "Look at you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, and meant it in ways that went far beyond physical therapy. She looked away first, cheeks warm. "That's my job." "Is it your job to make me laugh too?" he asked. "Because I don't remember laughing before you." Maya didn't have an answer for that. She just smiled quietly, and neither of them mentioned it again that night, though both of them thought about it long after she'd gone home. There were quiet nights, too, that never made it into anyone's version of the story but their own. Nights when Daehyun sat on the back terrace long after Maya and Noah had gone home, staring at the garden lights, wondering how a man who had once controlled half a city's underground finance now felt more alive over a game of checkers with an 8-year-old than he ever had closing a 9-figure deal. He thought about his father sometimes on those nights. His father, who had built the family's fortune with an iron grip and a colder heart, who had taught him that affection was a weakness to be hidden, never indulged. His father would have hated Maya on principle, hated her simplicity, her lack of pedigree, the honesty in her that couldn't be bought or intimidated. And yet it was that same honesty that had done what a decade of surgeries and painkillers never could. It had made him want to stand up again, not for the business, not for his name, but simply to walk beside her without a cane between them. Maya had her own quiet nights. She'd sit at her kitchen table after Noah was asleep, staring at the small stack of unpaid bills she never quite managed to clear, and ask herself the same question over and over. What was she doing? Falling for a man whose world was so far from her own that she sometimes felt like a guest in her own life whenever she visited his estate. She had loved once before, simply and completely, and lost it just as simply, just as completely, to an illness that had taken her husband in 11 months. She wasn't sure her heart had the architecture left to survive losing something like that twice. But then Daehyun would say something unexpectedly gentle, or Noah would run to him instead of to her when he skinned his knee in the garden, and all her careful caution would dissolve into something she no longer had the energy to fight. "You're doing that thing again," Daehyun told her one evening, watching her chew the inside of her cheek the way she did whenever she was overthinking. "What thing?" "Deciding whether to let yourself be happy." He said it lightly, but his eyes were serious. "You don't have to decide alone, you know." "I've been deciding things alone for 3 years," she said. "It's a hard habit to break." "Then let me help you break it," he said. "One step at a time, like everything else." She laughed despite herself, and for a moment the weight she carried everywhere felt just a little lighter. If their story had been left alone, that might have been the whole of it, a slow, quiet healing between two people who found something honest in each other. But somebody was watching, and that somebody had no intention of letting it stay that simple. If this story is pulling you in already, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it, and it only takes a second. Maya's half-sister Vanessa had never learned to be happy for anyone else's good fortune. It wasn't entirely her fault. Growing up, Maya had always been the one people gravitated toward, the patient one, the kind one, the one teachers praised and neighbors adored. Vanessa had spent her whole childhood standing slightly behind her sister's shadow, and something bitter had taken root in that shade and never stopped growing. When Vanessa found out that her exhausted, overworked sister had somehow caught the attention of one of the wealthiest men in the country, the bitterness curdled into something sharper. "You're really going to just be his physical therapist forever?" Vanessa asked one afternoon, arms crossed, watching Maya fold laundry in her small apartment. "Girl, a man like that doesn't fall for women like us by accident. Either he wants something, or you're wasting an opportunity." "It's not like that," Maya said, though the color in her cheeks suggested otherwise. "Sure it isn't." Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just be careful. Men like that always have people around them who don't want to share." She wasn't wrong. She just wasn't being honest about which side of that warning she'd end up on. Vanessa began finding excuses to visit Maya at the estate, offering to help with Noah, offering to bring meals, offering a warmth that Maya, starved for family support, welcomed without suspicion. She had no way of knowing her sister was quietly gathering information about the estate, about the family's holdings, about exactly how much money surrounded the man her sister was falling in love with. Meanwhile, Ryu Seok-won was watching from a different angle entirely. Sukwon had spent years positioning himself as the responsible alternative to his nephew, the uncle who understood tradition, who understood duty, who would never let something as inconvenient as a chronic injury interfere with the family's image. Dae-hyun's slow, stubborn recovery was inconvenient enough. A romance with a working-class single mother, in Sukwon's eyes, was a humiliation waiting to happen. "She's making him soft," Sukwon told his closest advisor one evening, watching through a window as Dae-hyun walked, slowly, with only a slight limp, across the garden with Maya beside him. He used to be feared. Now he's laughing at a child's dinosaur jokes. "Perhaps that isn't the worst thing," the advisor offered carefully. Sukwon didn't answer. He was already thinking of ways to end it. It didn't take him long to identify the perfect instrument for his plan. A jealous sister with expensive tastes and an old grudge was almost too easy to find. He approached Vanessa on a rainy afternoon outside a coffee shop, introducing himself as a family friend concerned about Dae-hyun's well-being. The conversation that followed was calm, careful, and utterly without conscience. "Your sister is a lovely woman," Sukwon said, "but she doesn't belong in that world. It would be a kindness, really, to help her see that before she gets hurt." "And what exactly do you want from me?" Vanessa asked, though the calculation was already forming behind her eyes. "Nothing complicated," Sukwon said. "Just an opportunity, arranged carefully. A misunderstanding, shall we say. One that ends things before they go any further." He named a figure. It was enough to change Vanessa's life. Enough to erase every ounce of hesitation she might have had. "What do I have to do?" she asked. That night, alone in her apartment, Vanessa sat with a number Sukwon had given her and stared at it for a long time without dialing. Some part of her, buried under years of quiet resentment, still remembered being a little girl who used to braid her sister's hair before school, who used to feel proud, not jealous, when Maya brought home good grades or kind words from teachers. That little girl would never have agreed to what Sukwon was proposing. But that little girl had grown up watching her sister get chosen, again and again, by teachers, by friends, by their own mother in the small unspoken ways that children notice and never forget. She had grown up believing that kindness was a finite resource, and that every drop of it given to Maya was a drop taken from her. It wasn't true, not really, but grief and envy rarely bother with the truth when they've had years to calcify into something harder. She thought about the life the money could buy her. Not just comfort, but proof that she mattered, that she deserved good things too, that she wasn't simply the sister standing in someone else's shadow anymore. She told herself Maya would recover. She told herself no one would truly be hurt in the end, that broken hearts mended eventually, that this was simply the universe correcting an imbalance that had existed since they were children. She believed her own justification just enough to make the call. "Be at the family gathering next month," Sukwon said. "Be charming. Be patient. I'll handle the rest." Vanessa should have said no. Some small part of her, the part that remembered being a little girl who once loved her sister without complication, whispered that she should walk away. She didn't listen. The family gathering arrived on a warm evening, lanterns strung across the garden, quiet music playing, the kind of event that was meant to celebrate Dae-hyun's continued recovery in front of extended relatives who still doubted his ability to lead. Maya wasn't invited, a deliberate decision by Sukwon, who wanted no witnesses who might complicate his plan. Vanessa, introduced as Maya's supportive sister, mingled easily, laughing at the right moments, complimenting the right people. Dae-hyun, distracted and slightly wary of a gathering he knew was really about proving himself to skeptical relatives, barely noticed when Vanessa refilled his drink. He didn't know it had been altered. He wouldn't remember much of what happened after. The details of that night remained deliberately blurred, both for Dae-hyun and for the story itself. Some things are better left unsaid than dwelt upon. What matters is what came after. What matters is the confusion Dae-hyun felt waking the next morning with no memory of the hours before, and the calm, rehearsed explanation Vanessa offered when he asked what happened. "You don't remember?" she said, feigning concern that would have fooled anyone. "We spent the night together, Dae-hyun. You said things I never thought I'd hear from you." He didn't believe her at first. He told her so, plainly, coldly. But doubt is a patient poison, and Sukwon had made sure there would be more evidence to feed it. Weeks later, Vanessa returned with medical documents. A pregnancy. Dates that lined up just precisely enough with the night of the gathering. A corrupt doctor, paid handsomely by Sukwon, had falsified every page. Dae-hyun stared at the papers in his hands and felt something inside him collapse. "This isn't possible," he said. "I don't remember." "You don't remember a lot of things from that night," Vanessa said softly. "That doesn't mean they didn't happen." He wanted to refuse it. Every instinct told him something was wrong. But the documents looked real. The doctor, when questioned, confirmed everything with practiced sincerity. And the guilt of not remembering, of not being able to swear with certainty that it hadn't happened, ate away at his resolve until he no longer knew what to believe. He confided, briefly, in his uncle, the one person he thought he could trust with something this fragile. "These things happen," Sukwon told him, his voice a careful blend of sympathy and resignation. "A man in your position has responsibilities. Perhaps this is fate's way of reminding you where you truly belong." "I don't believe in fate," Dae-hyun said. "I believe in evidence. And none of this feels right." "Feelings are not evidence," Sukwon replied smoothly. "The documents are. The doctor is. What more do you need?" Dae-hyun had no answer for that, and it was precisely the silence Sukwon had been counting on. A man drowning in doubt rarely questions the hand that seems to be offering him solid ground, even when that hand is the one holding him under. It was in that state of confusion and self-doubt that Maya found out. Not from him. From Sukwon himself, who made sure the news reached her in the cruelest way possible, an anonymous message, forged documents attached, delivered the very morning she'd planned to bring Noah over for what she thought would be an ordinary visit. She confronted Dae-hyun that same evening. That confrontation was the argument you heard at the very beginning of this story. The rain, the shaking hands, the words neither of them could take back. "I didn't touch her," he told her. "I would never." But he couldn't say with full certainty what had happened that night, and Maya, already reeling, already betrayed by a family that had never fully accepted her, read his hesitation as guilt. "There are papers, Dae-hyun," she said. "There's a woman carrying your child. What am I supposed to believe?" She left with Noah that night, into a storm that felt like the whole world crying with her. Dae-hyun searched for her for weeks. He hired people. He called every number he had. Every trail went cold, because Sukwon had made sure of that too, quietly buying silence from anyone who might have known where Maya had gone. Eventually, someone, another paid actor in Sukwon's careful scheme, brought Dae-hyun a set of photographs. Maya, smiling, standing beside another man in what appeared to be a wedding ceremony. They were fabricated from beginning to end, staged with actors and edited with a precision that would have fooled almost anyone in that much pain. Dae-hyun believed them. Grief has a way of accepting the story that hurts the least, and believing Maya had simply moved on hurt less than believing she was somewhere out there, suffering, and he had no way to reach her. He stopped searching. He didn't know that the woman in those fabricated photographs had never smiled that way in her life. He didn't know that the real Maya, in the weeks after she left, was falling apart in ways far more serious than a broken heart. If you're feeling this story in your chest right now, drop a comment telling us what you think really happened that night. We read every single one, and it helps us know you're still with us. After leaving Seoul, Maya moved to a small town 3 hours away, taking a job at a modest clinic and renting a tiny apartment above a bakery. She told herself she was starting over. In truth, she was barely holding on. No one noticed his mother crying at night when she thought he was asleep. He noticed the way she'd stopped humming her old songs. One evening, driving home from a late shift in heavy rain, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, Maya's car slid off a curve she'd driven 100 times before. The impact was severe. By the time paramedics arrived, she had already slipped into unconsciousness. The coma lasted for nearly a year. Noah went to live with his grandmother, a kind but aging woman who did her best to explain to an 8-year-old why his mother wouldn't wake up, why the man his mother once smiled around had disappeared from their lives entirely, why everything felt like it had shattered all at once. Noah didn't fully understand grown-up betrayals. But he understood in the simple, stubborn way children understand things, that something about the story didn't add up. His mother had never lied to him. She would never have simply disappeared without a reason. And Vanessa, the aunt who used to bring gifts and smiles, had stopped visiting the moment his mother fell ill, which struck even an 8-year-old as strange. Grief made Noah quiet for a long time, but quiet children notice things loud ones miss. It was nearly a year later, during a rare visit to Vanessa's apartment arranged by his grandmother, that Noah found something that would change everything. He'd wandered into a spare room looking for a bathroom, and instead found an old phone charging on a desk, its screen lit with a voice memo app still open from a call that had apparently ended without being properly closed. Curious the way children are curious about things adults leave lying around, he pressed play. He didn't understand every word. He was 8, not a detective. But he understood enough, a conversation between his aunt and a man he didn't recognize, discussing dates, documents, and a plan that had unfolded exactly like the story his grandmother had once tried, gently, to explain to him. He didn't say anything to his aunt. Some instinct, sharper than his years, told him to stay quiet and simply take the phone with him, tucking it into his backpack before anyone noticed. That night, in his grandmother's house, he played the recording again, and again. Slowly, piece by piece, an 8-year-old boy began to understand that the man who once let him win at checkers and laughed at his dinosaur facts had never done anything wrong at all. He found Dae-hyun's number in an old contact list his mother had left in a notebook years ago, one she'd never gotten around to throwing away. He called 2 nights before a wedding Dae-hyun had finally, exhaustedly, agreed to under relentless pressure from Seok-won, a wedding to Vanessa, arranged under the guise of family honor, one Dae-hyun had accepted only because he'd stopped believing anything better was possible for him. Dae-hyun almost didn't answer the unknown number. When a small, familiar voice said his name, he nearly dropped the phone. Noah. His voice cracked in a way he hadn't allowed it to crack in over a year. Is that you? I found something, Noah said, all business, the way children get when they believe they're carrying something important. You need to hear it. It's about my mom. He sent the recording that same night. Dae-hyun listened to it 4 times before he could fully process what he was hearing. Vanessa's voice. Seok-won's voice. A conversation laying out, in careful, damning detail, exactly how a pregnancy had been fabricated, exactly how a doctor had been paid, exactly how photographs had been staged to convince a grieving man that the woman he loved had abandoned him for someone else. Something that had been frozen inside him for a year finally cracked open. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, he had already begun quietly unraveling everything Seok-won had spent over a year building. Investigators he trusted personally, people with no loyalty to his uncle, uncovered the financial transfers linking Seok-won to the corrupt doctor. They found the falsified medical records, still stored, arrogantly, on a clinic server nobody had bothered to secure. They tracked down the photographer who had staged the fake wedding photographs, a man who folded the moment he realized how much trouble he was actually in. Within days, the entire fabricated story that had cost Dae-hyun and Maya a year of their lives lay exposed on his desk in black and white. He canceled the wedding 48 hours before it was set to happen, standing in front of assembled relatives and calmly, without raising his voice, explaining exactly what his uncle had done. Seok-won didn't deny it once confronted with the evidence. There was no point. He simply stood there, stripped of the influence he'd spent years accumulating, as extended family members who once deferred to him began quietly withdrawing their support instead. Vanessa's confession came later, and it came with tears that seemed, for once, genuinely her own rather than performed. She sat across from Dae-hyun in a quiet room, unable to look at him directly. I told myself it wasn't really hurting anyone, she said. I told myself Maya would find someone else, that she'd be fine, that the money would fix everything I was jealous about. She wiped her eyes. It didn't fix anything. I just felt more empty every single day. Where is she? Dae-hyun asked, voice tight. Where is Maya? Vanessa's face crumpled. I don't know. I never checked. I didn't want to know. It was Noah, again, quiet and determined, who finally gave him the answer. A hospital 3 hours away, a name on a patient registry his grandmother had never stopped visiting, a coma that had lasted far longer than anyone should have had to endure. Dae-hyun drove there that same night, his limp more pronounced after hours behind the wheel, his hands unsteady on the wheel from something that had nothing to do with his injury. He sat beside her hospital bed for hours that first night, holding a hand that hadn't moved in months, telling her everything. The truth about that night at the gathering, the forged documents, the fake photographs, his uncle's betrayal, Vanessa's confession, and how a small boy's stubborn curiosity had unraveled a lie built to last forever. He didn't know if she could hear him. The doctors offered no promises. But he came back every single day after that, sitting beside her, talking, reading to her, holding her hand through hours that blurred into days. 3 weeks later, her fingers moved. The doctors called it a positive sign, cautious as always with their optimism. Dae-hyun called it the first good thing that had happened to him in over a year. Maya's eyes opened on an ordinary Tuesday morning, confused, disoriented, struggling to understand where she was and how much time had passed. The first face she saw, blurry and unfamiliar for just a moment before recognition sharpened it into focus, was Dae-hyun's. "You're here," she whispered, voice hoarse from disuse. "I never stopped looking," he said, tears he didn't bother hiding sliding down his face. "I'm sorry it took so long." Recovery was slow. It always is after something that severe. Maya had to relearn things her body had forgotten during the long months of unconsciousness. How to hold a spoon steady, how to stand without support, how to trust that the ground beneath her feet would hold. There were setbacks along the way, days when frustration got the better of her, and she snapped at everyone within reach, days when the simplest tasks left her in tears from sheer exhaustion. Dae-hyun never once treated those days as failures. He remembered too clearly what it felt like to be on the other side of that same struggle, and he understood, better than most, that healing was rarely a straight line for anyone. Dae-hyun stayed through all of it, the way she had once stayed through all of his. Their roles had reversed, and neither of them minded at all. "You don't have to do this," Maya told him one afternoon, exhausted after a physical therapy session that had left her shaking with effort. "You already have an empire to run." "The empire can wait," he said simply. "It's waited this long. It can wait a little longer." Noah visited every day after school, dinosaur figures in hand, narrating elaborate stories to his slowly recovering mother the same way he once had for Dae-hyun. The three of them, broken in different ways and by different lies, began to rebuild something steadier than what they'd lost. Vanessa, in the months that followed, quietly stepped away from the family circle she'd tried so hard to infiltrate. She sent letters, eventually real ones, apologizing in words that finally sounded honest rather than rehearsed. Maya didn't respond for a long time. Forgiveness, she learned, wasn't something that could be rushed simply because the truth had finally arrived. Suk-won lost everything he'd schemed to protect, his standing, his influence, the respect he'd spent decades cultivating through fear rather than trust. What remained of his reputation crumbled the moment the family learned exactly how far he'd been willing to go. Months later, on a quiet afternoon in a park neither of them had visited before, Noah ran ahead with a kite that refused to catch the wind properly, laughing every time it dipped back toward the ground. Maya slipped her hand into Dae-hyun's without thinking about it, the way you reach for something that has simply become part of your life. He took a few steady steps beside her, no cane in his free hand, his limp still visible with every stride. He didn't try to hide it anymore. The pain, when it came, no longer felt like something to be ashamed of. It felt, instead, like proof of everything he'd survived to get to this exact moment. "Does it still hurt?" Maya asked quietly, watching him move. "Every day," he admitted. "But it doesn't own me anymore. Not like it used to." She smiled, the kind of smile that had been missing from her face for far too long. "Neither does anything else that tried to take you from me." Noah's kite finally caught the wind, rising higher than either of them expected, and for a moment they simply stood there, watching it climb against a clear afternoon sky, Three people who had survived a year of lies built by people who should have loved them enough to tell the truth instead. A lie can separate two hearts for a season, but truth has a way of finding its voice eventually, often in the smallest, most unexpected places, sometimes even in the curious hands of a child who simply refused to stop asking questions. Dae-hyun learned that real strength was never about keeping an empire together. It was about having the courage to keep fighting for love, even after everyone around him insisted it was time to surrender. And Maya learned something just as important, that forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It simply opens a door to something better than what was lost. If this story moved you even a little, we'd love for you to like this video, drop a comment telling us your favorite moment, and subscribe so you never miss the next story we tell. Every single one of you watching until the end is the reason we keep making these. Thank you for staying with us. We'll see you in the next story.